Looks like I have to work on my publicity a little bit. I'll get the word out that we're back on track. So I wanted to talk about Netilas Yadayim, and I wanted to focus on one particular issue, which is the issue of getting up before the day starts. So in Cincinnati, now that we are approaching the winter, this is a big issue, and it's about to become an even, no, I take that back. It's going to be less of an issue once the clocks change. But it's a big, right now, we're at the one of the hardest times of the year, because sunrise is getting very late. Sunrise this morning was 7:53. Can you believe that? Almost 8 o'clock until Netzach Hama. Unbelievable. So for working people that want to daven Shachris at 6:30 and to be out the door by close to 7, that's a problem. That's a challenge. So we have to start inching our Shachris back a little bit at Gulf Manor, and we have to put on Talis and Tefillin after Psukei de Zimra. We have to do lots of things to be able to work it out. So there's a lot of different halachas that are affected by sunrise being late and getting up and getting started so early relative to sunrise. And so therefore I want to, I think it's appropriate to kind of delve into these halachas a little bit. And the first one on the list is Netilas Yadayim. So Netilas Yadayim is a very interesting halacha. There's multiple different reasons for it that are at play simultaneously. And what's unique about Netilas Yadayim is that depending on the scenario, you might have one reason but not the other. So let's go through this. So maybe Chaim, maybe you can help us out here. You want to share perhaps some of the reasons that you might know of for why we do Netilas Yadayim. Why do we wash our hands in the morning?
In the morning, Ruach Ra.
Ruach Ra, good.
And also, you might have touched unclean places while you were asleep.
Touch unclean places, beautiful. So those are the two that everyone says. Ruach Ra, which is in the Shulchan Aruch. It's very clear that there's a concern. Now, what is Ruach Ra? So Ruach Ra literally translates to like an evil spirit. My understanding of it is something similar to Tuma, to spiritual impurity. Obviously not in the classic Torah sense of like someone who came in contact with a dead body, or someone who touched something, any of the impure discharges and all these different things that the Torah talks about. It's none of that, but it's some type of idea of an impurity that comes. Now, there's a question as to what exactly brings it about. Is it nightfall? Is it being the night? Is that what causes this Ruach Ra? Or is it sleep? Is it the fact that the person was sleeping and then they woke up from their sleep, being in a state of sleeping, that's what causes the Ruach Ra? That's the other idea.
I only ever heard the second one, because it's...
Oh, very good. Go ahead.
As when you're sleeping, there's 1/60th death on your fingertips, I thought.
Beautiful. Yes, so I've heard that as well, that when a person, there's a Gemara that says that when a person sleeps, they experience 1/60th of death. And we know that Misa, death, is the ultimate cause for impurity. A dead body is the Avi Avos HaTuma. It is the most powerful source of impurity. And therefore, even 1/60th of death leaves some degree of Ruach Ra, some type of Tuma, and it exits the body and leaves some residue, if you will, on the fingertips, on the fingers. So that is where the concept of Ruach Ra comes from. However, that's not the only, there is a different approach to it, which is actually very relevant to what we're going to talk about tonight. And that is that it's not caused by sleep, but rather it's caused by the night. The night itself has some degree of Ra. There's like Tov and Ra, and that the day is more the domain of Tov, and the night is the domain of Ra. And therefore, after passing through a night that has a certain, leaves a certain impurity on the person, that needs to be removed. That's the other option. Now, there's a whole nother approach to Netilas Yadayim that we did not yet mention, and that's the Rashba. So the Rosh is the one who says that it has to do touching parts of the body that are normally covered and are considered dirty parts of the body, and therefore it renders the hands soiled. So now, okay, big deal. So I have soiled hands. Well, who cares? The reason is because of davening. And then you want to, when you get up in the morning, you want to go say Shema, you want to go daven Shemona Esrei, that you're not allowed to do that with soiled hands. So that's why you have to wash your hands in the morning, specifically to prepare for davening. That is the opinion of the Rosh, which is one of the Rishonim.
Now, is that purely hygienic?
No, not at all. It's not a matter of hygiene. It's a matter of kavod hatfila. It's a matter of showing proper respect for the Shema and for the Shemona Esrei. So I make sure to prepare myself by having clean hands for Shema and Shemona Esrei.
Yeah, no, you're giving honor by being hygienic.
Oh, yes. Oh, that you meant hygienic, meaning that the washing is a hygienic washing as opposed to some type of like a heebie-jeebie spiritual ritual process. Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up. You're interrupting me, so I'm gonna have to remember to go back to tell you the Rashba in just a minute. But the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Daled number 4 in Or Chaim is dedicated to Netilas Yadayim. In Siman Daled and Siv Yud Beis, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Imshich sheich yodav l'toch kli shel mayim. Let's say a person rubs his hands together inside of a vessel full of water. Also, lo netila the kriya shema l'tfila. That is a valid washing for Shema and for Shemona Esrei. Aval lo l'ruach ra, but not for ruach ra shalei, and that's upon them. So there you have it. That's exactly your point, Chaim. That here the Shulchan Aruch is stating clearly there's such a thing as washing your hands in a way which is sufficient for hygiene, which will prepare you for Shema and Shemona Esrei, but it's not appropriate for the Ruach Ra because that's more of a spiritual concept. That is not a hygienic concept. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. So let's continue. So now I had the Rashba. That's what I was going to tell you. There's one more idea. Now, the Rosh, okay, I'll tell you what's primary and what's secondary in a moment. The Rashba says an interesting idea. This, for some reason, most people are not aware of, but the Mishnah Berurah quotes it right in the beginning of the Siman together with the Rosh. And the Rashba says the idea is because every day when we wake up in the morning, we become a new person. That's the idea. His language is a Bria Chadasha, a new entity, a new creation. And he writes that just as a Kohen prepares to serve Hashem by washing his feet and hands, so too we, when we become a new person, and now we kind of start a new day as a new person, ready to prepare to serve Hashem, we have to wash our hands just like that Kohen and to prepare ourselves to serve Hashem. That is the Rashba's concept. Okay, so now we have the Rosh, we have the Rashba, and we have the Ruach Ra. The Rosh is the idea of touching the hands getting soiled. The Rashba is the idea of becoming a new person. And the Ruach Ra is some degree of tumah that's left on the fingers. The Rosh and the Rashba are the primary reasons for Netilas Yadayim. And you need those reasons to justify a bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu al Netilas Yadayim. Ruach Ra is more of a secondary reason. which influences, the way that we do Netilas Yadayim, as we mentioned before, that it's better to pour from a vessel as opposed to just, washing your hands with soap and water, because you want to remove that ruach ra'ah. But as far as the bracha is concerned, it's not in the same level. So now, the place where these things become interesting is when you remove some of the variables. So one of the classic example that we're more familiar with is staying up all night. If someone stays up all night, the Shulchan Aruch says, this is Sif Yud Gimel, there's a suffix, a doubt, whether one is required to wash his hands in the morning, to pray, and to remove the impurity from his hands. There's a suffix. So therefore, what does the Rambam say to do? So wash your hands and do not recite a bracha. So now, what's the scenario where we deal with this the most? What do you say, Chaim? What's the day of the year? Shavuos, that's right. Shavuos is the night where there's an accepted minhag to stay up all night long studying Torah. And therefore, one of the issues, if you want to go straight from your all night learning into davening shacharis, one of the issues you run into is, what am I going to do for Netilas Yadayim? And you cannot go ahead and just wash regular and make a bracha, because the Shulchan Aruch says very clearly, it's a suffix. If you are required to wash your hands. Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah here explains what the suffix is. He explains the doubt. And it's a little bit tricky, because he writes that as far as the rush is concerned, that certainly does not apply. The rush, who, as Chaim put it, it's a hygienic issue. It's a very practical issue, that my hands became soiled because when I'm sleeping, I don't know where my hands are going, and it's very likely that they touched dirty parts of the body, covered parts of the body. If I'm awake all night long, so then I know where my hands have been, and then I do not have that concern, or I don't have that. It's more than just a concern. I can't assume that my hands became soiled, and therefore I would not be allowed to recite on Netilas Yadayim, because I'm not in the scenario where I have this mitzvah, where I have this obligation. The Rashba, so here's an interesting thing. The Rashba, who says it's about becoming a new person, that also, it's clear from the Mishnah Berurah that has to do with sleep. It's only if the person goes to sleep. But what's interesting is that the Mishnah Berurah says that according to that opinion, in a scenario where a person doesn't sleep at all, he still has the exact same mitzvah because of a low plug. There's a concept in Halacha called a low plug, which means a blanket rule or a uniform rule where we expand a practice or a halacha to apply universally, even though its reasoning was for a specific reason that does not always apply. It only applies to certain scenarios. But in order to keep things simple, in order to avoid confusion, there's a concept of low plug, of keeping it universal. So says the Mishnah Berurah, according to the Rashba that says that the idea is about becoming a new person, the Rashba understands that the mitzvah Netilas Yadayim was instituted as a low plug, as a universal mitzvah, which regardless of whether the logic applies or not, you always do it. So therefore, it's a suffix when you stay up all night. According to the Rashba, it's a low plug, it's universal, you do it, you wash, you make a bracha. According to the Rush, that's very practical, it's hygienic, it's about clean hands, your hands are clean. You don't wash, you do not make a bracha. And whenever we have a doubt which involves a bracha, you do not recite the bracha, but you do perform the mitzvah. So that is exactly the logic behind the Ramah, who says, go ahead and wash, but do not recite a bracha. Now, the Mishnah Brura says that there are achronim, there are later authorities who take issue with this, and they don't like the psak of the Ramah, and they say that no, you do have to make a bracha. So that complicates things for us a little bit, because meaning they're going with the Rashba, and they're saying the Rashba's opinion is good enough to go ahead and make a bracha. So now to go ahead and skip the bracha, you're in a gray area. Now, if we leave it at that, we would still tell you not to make the bracha, because ultimately it's still a suffix and we are still a doubt, and we do not make a bracha when we have a doubt. However, the Mishnah Brura says that many poskim, many authorities suggest that there's a legal loophole. There's a way to get ourselves out of the problem. Do you know what that is, Chaim?
I would go into the restroom.
That's it. So that's what we all know from Shavuos. That's right. You go to the restroom, and then a person soils his hands when he uses the restroom, and then that justifies reciting the bracha, because now you have the Rush's logic on your side, right? The Rush who said the reason for washing your hands is because the hands become soiled. Even if someone who stayed up all night and his hands didn't get soiled by, touching unclean parts of the body, they still became soiled by the use of the restroom. So there you have it. That is the suggestion that's given, and that is common practice nowadays, which is why in yeshiva, the one time a year where you were guaranteed to wait in line to use the bathroom was Shavuos. That's right. Because right at that moment, when you got past Alos HaShachar, past the daybreak, and we're in that like 10-minute stretch until Shachris is about to begin for sunrise Shachris, everybody lines up to use the restroom. So there you go. That's the way to solve that issue. Now let's move on to what's going to be a little more common for us these days during the winter, which is washing your hands before daybreak. So you went to bed. So this is a whole different scenario. But then you got up and you washed your hands very, very early. So first things first. Chaim, what time is daybreak in Indy? Do you know?
It's nearly the same.
Nearly the same as Cincinnati?
There's only like either 5 or 10 minutes difference.
Only a 5 or 10 minute difference. Okay.
In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, it's exactly 12.
Really, it's exactly a 12-minute difference. So let me very quickly pull up my Zmanim and get a real-time stats on Cincinnati as to what time daybreak will be tomorrow. And then we can talk about this in the real deal. Okay, so 72 minutes before sunrise. Sunrise in Cincinnati tomorrow morning will be 7:54 and 16 seconds. And Alos HaShachar, the typical opinion that we follow as far as sunrise is concerned, as far as daybreak is concerned, is 72 minutes before sunrise. That's when the first little inklings of light start to show. So 72 minutes before sunrise is 6:34. So Shachris at Gulf Manor Synagogue this week is 6:35. So everybody who's coming to daven Shachris at Gulf Manor Synagogue, I'm certainly hoping, it will have washed their hands before daybreak, right? So now we have an interesting scenario here. We have a person that went to sleep, and they woke up in the morning, and then they washed their hands. So as far as the rush is concerned, they slept. So they have the concern, the very likely scenario, that while they were sleeping, their hands touched unclean parts of the body, became soiled, and therefore they have to wash their hands. And according to the Rashba, that the idea is becoming a new person. The person went to sleep and they woke up in the morning, they're a new person, a new day, they have to wash their hands. So there's no question, according to the primary reasons for washing one's hands, you absolutely need to wash your hands. And therefore, you go ahead and you do that. You wash your hands and you recite a bracha. No question about that. The interesting thing about this scenario is, what do I do after daybreak? Do I wash my hands again? What about the ruach ra'ah? What about that impurity that gets on the hands, which we said that there's really two different ways of understanding what brings that about. It's either the sleep or it's the night. So if it's the night, it's still nighttime when I washed that first time. Now I didn't do anything wrong because I had the Rosh and the Rashba telling me to wash my hands, and I had the mitzvah, and I washed my hands and I recite the bracha, no problem. But the impurity on my hands might still be there because it was still nighttime when I washed. The night wasn't over yet. So therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says as follows: Hishkim kodem amud hashachar. Someone gets up before daybreak, v'notal yadav, and they wash their hands. Yesh lehistapek. There is what to question, to doubt. Maybe he's got to wash his hands again. When the day becomes lit. To remove that ruach ra'ah, to remove that impurity, hashora al yadayim, which rests upon the hands. And then once again, the Ramah chimes in, v'yitzleim below bracha. Therefore, wash them without a bracha. So therefore, what do we see the Shulchan Aruch saying? You wash your hands when you wake up in the morning, and it's before 6:34 a.m. tomorrow morning in Cincinnati. So then you wash your hands whenever you wake up with a bracha, the first time. Then, lechatchila, when you get past 6:34 a.m., whenever you get to the most appropriate time to do this, the first chance you get, then you go ahead and you wash your hands again. And the second time, it's without a bracha. So this is where we see that even though you are washing your hands for a legitimate reason, you're doing it because of the ruach ra'ah, because of that impurity. That's a secondary reason, and that will not justify making a bracha. So therefore, the second time you wash your hands, you do it without the bracha. Now, so here's an interest. So the Mishnah Berurah adds in two little details that I want to add for you. How about a scenario of someone who went back to sleep? So let's say a good scenario of this would be someone who's traveling. Let's say someone has to catch a red eye, and the flight is taking off at 6 a.m. And it is Cincinnati, and it's the winter. So sunrise is not till 7:54. Alos HaShachar is not till 6:34. So what does this fellow do? He wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He washes Netilas Yadayim, makes a bracha, heads for the airport. And then he gets to the airport, he does everything he's got to do, and he gets on the plane, 5:30, and they get to the tarmac, the runway, et cetera, take off at 6 a.m. And then, of course, after waking up at 4 in the morning and being stuck on an airplane at 6 in the morning, what does he do? He takes a nap. He goes to sleep. So now he's sleeping at 6 a.m. And when he lands, he wakes up, and then he's going to go to a minyan to daven Shacharis. Okay? So now, should he wash a second time, and should he make a bracha when he washes that second time? What do you say, Chaim?
The only thing I can think of is that he's a new creation now. So we did say to say a bracha then, but that wasn't a second time, was it?
Right.
But the Rashba.
Yeah. So what do you say? So you're thinking maybe here we have the Rajba on our side, so he should make a bracha the second time as well.
But we still don't have the Rasha's opinion because he was sleeping with his clothes on.
Oh, sleeping with his clothes on. Very good. That's an interesting question you're raising. If someone sleeps with their clothes on, does that negate the concern of the rush? So you're making a logical argument. But I'm just thinking about most people nowadays wear pajamas to sleep, and pajamas in many scenarios could be good enough to make it pretty unlikely that the person's going to touch soiled parts of the body. And nonetheless, I think that we do not differentiate between someone that was wearing pajamas and someone that was not. We kind of assume, even if you're wearing pajamas, somewhere along the way while you're sleeping, you're going to scratch something, you're going to touch something, and you're going
They're
to.
loose fitting.
They're loose fitting, you said, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm not so comfortable. I'm not sure. We would have to look into that. That's a really interesting question. I sleep with my clothes on, so you don't have to rush. Okay, either way, so let me share with you what the Mishnah Berurah says. So bottom line is that the psak halacha is the fellow slept on the plane, then he gets to where his destination. He washes his hands a second time, but he does not recite a bracha. Even though in this scenario, he's got a double cause for ruach ra. So first things first, in terms of the Rashba, the reality is that even though he slept and he woke up, the Rashba will not apply. You know why? Because the Mishnah Berurah says in actually a different place that this idea of Bria Chadasha, that's once a day. A person only becomes a new person once a day. It doesn't happen multiple times a day. A person, could take many naps over the course of the day. We're not going to suggest that again and again and again, it's a Bria Chadasha experience. So therefore, he does not, the Rashba doesn't apply. The rush we suggested is likely that does not apply either. And so what does apply is ruach ra. So now the difference in this scenario is you have a definite ruach ra, because now you have both potential causes for ruach ra. You have the fact that it was still nighttime because it was still 6 a.m. It wasn't daybreak until 6:34, and he slept. That bringing the ruach ra, that's not a once a day. That's any time. So therefore, you might have thought that if you have certainty that there's a presence of ruach ra, of that impurity, that he would have to recite a bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. And this is the point I was making before. Ruach ra by itself does not justify the bracha. Even when it's a certainty that the ruach ra is there, I have both reasons for ruach ra. Ruach ra is not enough reason by itself to require a bracha. You need the rush and the rashba. Okay, one last scenario to share with you before we conclude that the Mishnah Berurah teaches is, what about someone forgets to make the bracha the first time? So let's say the person woke up, let's say they're davening Gulf Man Synagogue. So they wake up 6 a.m. and then they wash their hands in the Netilas Yadayim and they make a bracha, and they forget to make a bracha. And then they go to shul and they daven shachars. And then they realize, oh, I washed before alos hashachar. Let me go wash my hands again now that I'm done davening. And then they go and they wash their hands again. And then they realize, oh, I never made a bracha the first time. Maybe I should make a bracha the second time. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. You do not make the bracha the second time because you're only washing your hands for that ruach ra, which is not good enough reason to say that you have the full mitzvah in Netilas Yadayim to require a bracha and to say the words vitzivanu. That's what the Mishnah Berurah focus zeroes in on. You can't say a bracha of vitzivonu that I was commanded to do this if I'm not really required to do it. I'm just doing it because of the ruach ra, which is not the real reason for the obligation. So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, even in that scenario, one, even though someone should definitely be washing, regardless of whether they made the bracha the first time, the fact that they forgot the bracha the first time will not help to allow a bracha the second time, because at the end of the day, the second time that the person is washing, he's not doing it because of any obligation. He's doing it to remove the ruach ra, which, as we mentioned, is not reason enough to obligate netilas yadayim.
Could he fix it if he could go to the restroom?
Oh, so interesting. Going to the restroom only helps if it's if it's before davening.
Oh, I see. That's true.
It's when your hands are soiled and you need to wash them in preparation of tefillah. But the scenario I gave you, the person already davened, so that would not help.
So if you managed to wash before davening again a second time, and then he remembered he didn't say a bracha, he could say a bracha if he went to the restroom.
Yeah. In theory, that should work. Exactly right. Okay. Shekayach, thank you everybody for joining. Emir Hashem will continue at this time next week, 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday nights with some more halacha. Okay, I wish you a wonderful week. Have a good night.
You too.